Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Coker-Hook, and tonight we're going to be talking about a subject that I found very interesting. It has to do with radio communication, with what's referred to as amateur radio or ham radio. And this came about because I was at an event last summer here in Mountain View where I came across a group of people who are part of the Citizens Emergency Response Team here, and they all have these radios, right? They are the shortwave or ham type radios. And I thought, what a fascinating topic. So I asked two folks to come and join me here tonight, Jordan Mackauer and Wolfgang Pollock, who are both amateur radio licensees and operators and have been for quite some time. And I asked them here to educate us on this fantastic technology. So Jordan and Wolfgang, thank you for being here at Reference Point.
I'm glad we can be here.
So am I. I mean, it's an interesting subject matter. It's something that I had known about or been introduced to some time ago. I think I'd mentioned to you guys my son many years ago, 15 years ago or so, thought, ooh, this is kind of cool. He may have heard about it when he was in Boy Scouts. I don't remember, but got a license, and I thought, now that's really cool. But it's an interesting area, and I think one of the things that first struck me was that the emergency response utilization, because that's how I kind of saw that over in Mountain View and a couple other places. So what is the thing about this form of communication that makes it so appropriate for an emergency communication situation?
Well, we have small radios, fairly good number of operators, and we are equipped to operate when the telephone is down, power is down, internet is down. We can provide communications, and that's.
And that's because a lot of the devices are battery operated, so, right?
But even if they weren't battery operated, there are times when a community will be cut off and they can have a generator, perhaps.
Oh, right, yeah.
Or some other, these days, other sources of power that could be used to supply energy for such a radio. In fact, the field day, which is coming up, a nationwide, maybe a worldwide event for people to make contacts to remote areas using, hopefully, battery or other power other than commercial means, is a good test for emergency preparedness.
Battery, solar.
So, right. So when we talk about this form rather than some of the other things, I mean, like, what is it about, like the cell service system? I'm not that that could be inhibiting communication. What is it about that form of communication media that is more of a problem if there is an emergency?
Well, I mean, the cell system could go down, and I think maybe one of the benefits of amateur radio is we have the diversity. There's lots of independent operators. Some person maybe not have the right equipment, but the variety and the diversity of the different operators make us more reliable in some ways.
A particular, I'll give one particular example before the time, if people can go back in time beyond the time of the cell phone. I had recently obtained the Federal Communication License, and I was playing with a used radio that I had, and this was June 23rd, 1971. The community around Cornell University, Chemung County, was completely inundated because of a flood. No cell phones, but there were people there who had amateur radios and resourcefulness. They hooked up wire antennas. They dug out generators, which existed back in those days.
Sure.
And in New York State, where Cornell University is located, I was playing with my radio some 200 plus miles away. I heard a distress call and answered that call to provide help to reach the proper authorities to get aid to to that county.
Cool, very cool. And that was a time when before cell phones. But as you were talking about that, I remember during the Loma Prieta earthquake, I was at my place in Palo Alto, right, and then power went out, etc. And the cell service was kind of goofy. Everybody and their brother was trying to call somebody, and so the whole system was overwhelmed. But what we're saying here is that a system like this doesn't necessarily get overwhelmed. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah, very cool.
Another occasion was during 9/11. I was in a county 35 miles outside of New York City during 9/11, and my son, who was would have been working in the Woolworth building next door to the World Trade Towers, was taking a course uptown. But when that disaster occurred, not only communication was down. You couldn't use a regular telephone. Couldn't go into a phone booth to make a call. There was no way of getting contact from one place to another. So it was overwhelming.
Well, yeah.
We had a case down here in the South Bay a couple of years ago where there was a telephone cable cut.
Oh,
and
sure.
We needed to provide a lot of
And you
help
can't
in that.
communicate. Well, let's talk a little bit about how this stuff works. I mean, because it's all about electromagnetic transmission is what we're talking about. And it's the movement of something through the air from a source point to a receipt point. That's that's sort of like what occurs. And Wolfgang, you brought a couple of things with you that are kind of, I guess they're radios, right? They're communication devices. And so maybe we could start by taking a look at one of those, pull up something.
Okay. So just here's your basic handheld radio. This is a very basic radio, comes out of China. This is an equivalent, almost equivalent radio that comes out of Japan.
Let me grab one of these.
Please.
Okay.
And so these work on VHF and UHF frequencies. So it's roughly the same bands that your police and fire radios might work. Not exactly the same, of course. And they're essentially line of sight, maybe a tiny bit more. We get outside of the building, but we use those in emergencies with repeater systems, where the repeater might sit on a mountaintop. We have a large number of repeaters in the area here, like on Black Mountain, Crystal Peak, Loma Prieta.
So a repeater, to define a repeater for us.
A repeater is essentially a receiver and a retransmitter. It does this automatically. It receives on one frequency and transmits on a different one. The same with these radios. They receive on one frequency and transmit on another. And we might also mention that these radios are powered by the equivalent of perhaps 3 or 4 AA batteries.
Yeah.
So and they are rechargeable. So they have perhaps 100 or more charges in them, depending on the quality of the battery.
Right. Okay. And so these, you mentioned repeaters being, as long as it increases the distance in which you can communicate if you've got a receive and resend.
Basically, what happens is I can communicate through a repeater with anybody who can also reach that repeater. So, and some of the repeaters we can reach from anywhere in the Bay Area.
Right.
And so that means I could effectively communicate, even though that's only line of sight, I can communicate with anybody in the Bay Area. So,
Line of sight, meaning, is it like 360-degree line of sight for something like this?
it's, well, if I can see the receiving station, I can.
And you can communicate with it.
That's,
okay.
That's
and if the receiving station, if I'm standing here and the receiving station is behind me, this one would be able to get.
Yeah,
because it's an omnidirectional signal that comes out of this. Okay, which is really interesting. That's kind of cool. Though we were chatting the other day about antennas that you can focus the signal to go to a particular direction, right? That's doable.
That is correct. So these antennas are essentially omnidirectional, and if you have that makes sense here because we want to communicate with people somewhere we don't even know. We don't want to even know exactly where
You don't know where
the
they
other
are,
person
right,
is.
yeah.
But if you know exactly where the other person is or the other station, then you can have a directional antenna which focuses the energy onto that station. It's essentially like a flashlight. If you have a light bulb that spreads its light evenly, it's equally weak everywhere. And if you have a mirror behind and have a flashlight, then you get your light focused.
You can focus that beam
on
of
a
energy
particular direction.
Yeah.
And the same thing with radios. You can have a directional antenna, focuses all your energy onto a particular station.
Cool, very cool.
And Wolfgang mentioned that a TV antenna is something like that as well. It's on a bar. There are separate, we'll call them elements, that are used to pull in the signal. Here, as he was telling you about the flashlight, this could be the reflector, like the mirror. And this could be like the lenses that are focusing it.
Right.
So the predominant direction that the signal will be sent or received is along this path.
Got it.
However, it could also receive signals from the side. But here is where the energy is focused.
The energy is focused, right. And, you know, something that was also interesting to me in our conversation the other day had to do with, I guess, you know, size matters when you're talking about antennas, right?
That is true.
Because we were, as a matter of fact, there's an image, one of the photos of an antenna that, Jordan, you took a picture out over near
Baylands.
the Baylands over here, and this thing looked like it's about 30 or 40 feet tall. I mean, it's huge antenna, and but you don't have to have something that massive in order to communicate. Is that right? I mean,
as Wolfgang says, the bigger the antenna, the better the transmitting and receiving. However, the antennas are for a particular frequency, and they have to be manufactured to do that particular job. Just having a random length of wire would really not be very helpful unless there's a special circuit that would allow that random length of wire to be most useful for a particular frequency. But as you say, size does matter because you want to intercept electromagnetic waves as well as send electromagnetic waves.
Can I give you the mirror or the flashlight example?
Sure.
If you wanted to receive, like astronomers, they receive light from stars, and, and they make bigger and bigger mirrors. And the bigger the mirror, the more light they capture.
Right.
Same idea with antennas. The bigger your antenna is, the more electromagnetic radiation you capture from.
And that antenna can be tall, or it can be wide, or a combination of the two.
A number of different design criteria.
Very cool.
And as long as we're talking about that particular type of thing, in the 1930s, there was a radio astronomer, Grote Reber, who built a way to detect the radio energy from stars. Radio astronomy, very useful thing. And he discovered that having many of these things, even though they're separated, could act like a gigantic antenna. To get energy.
Very cool. We're a little more than halfway through our time here today. I want to do a couple of things. One is let the folks that are watching our show know that if they have any questions about the subject matter we're talking about, send them in to us at info@referencepointtv.com, and I'll get them to Wolfgang and Jordan, and we'll get the answers and get it back to you. So I want to we've talked a little bit about the technology, or about the antennas and the transmission, electromagnetic waves and all that sort of stuff, and some practical utilization from an emergency activity perspective. But this is like this is a fun thing to do, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about it's yeah.
And that's why a lot of people get into it. I mean, the hobby has so many aspects, and I think different people are motivated by totally different things. But the fun is one important part. Some people go in just to do the emergency service. Some people go in just to build equipment, to design.
So you can build your own equipment?
Yes.
Oh, that's kind of like what they used to do when my son was, in the days of when the microcomputer would come out and he wanted to buy stuff and build his own computer. And you can build your own radio.
You can build your own radios, and you can.
Do you need special licensing to build a radio?
Not strictly to build it, but to use it.
Correct. Correct.
Not to build it, but to use it.
So the Federal Communications Commission, in their list of regulations, allows amateur operators like Wolfgang and myself, and millions of people around the world, the ability to build and maintain and service and modify their radios to do the job of broadcasting. And as Wolfgang said, that it's a very, very diverse hobby. The analogy I'd like to use is that of a tree with really big roots and many, many branches. And the one that I particularly like, I am really at the end of one particular branch of this huge tree.
Right.
I like to be able to speak to people around the world, to learn something about them, to ask them something about their culture, give me a few words of the language so that I could properly speak to them as well as they're speaking to me. And I got into this by shortwave listening. So this is a shortwave listener's card that I received hearing a
Put that
commercial
over here.
broadcast.
Maybe somebody can zoom in on that.
And I had to report that I heard this broadcast and this was the content on this frequency at this time, and would you please send me a shortwave listener's card to acknowledge that I've done that.
In fact, you did that. Very, very cool. And that's kind of like some guys. I was telling you guys, I'm a big Hard Rock Cafe fan, and when I go to a Hard Rock, I get some apparel. With these other guys and gals, they collect these pins, and they got pins everywhere. Dozens and dozens of pins, and this is like the same thing. You collect something. But you said something I want to touch on though, and that is, you can broadcast, you can build, etc. But I saw this quote that you guys had shared with me from the FCC that says that the amateur satellite services are for qualified persons of any age, we'll get to what qualified means in a minute, who are interested in radio technique solely with a personal aim and without pecuniary interest. So this is not some sort of a commercial endeavor that somebody would have. Is that correct?
In fact, we couldn't make it a commercial endeavor.
We're not allowed to play music. We're not allowed to promote something for money, but rather it's public service and fun.
And does some of that have to do with the frequencies on which you're permitted to transmit?
We
have a large spectrum of frequency that we can use.
We have an image, a frequency image. If you guys can pull that one up, so go ahead.
And different frequencies have different properties in terms of propagation and at what time you can reach what
certain
country.
locations.
And for example, frequencies.
By the way, before you say that, I'm sorry to interject, but I want to let the folks who are watching know that the dark green bands on the image they're seeing are the frequencies on which the amateur radio is allowed to transmit and receive.
That's correct.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but continue.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this radio earlier, and this is in a frequency range that's essentially line of sight. Okay? Now, I have a different radio here. This is a shortwave radio. It's different frequency range from this radio, and with this radio, I can reach, under good conditions, all around the world.
Wow. Well, that's something that's small. Of course, it has to be hooked up to an antenna.
It needs an antenna, but this one even has its own battery inside. So,
wow.
And it produces just about 10 watts, which is a little bit more than your night light in the bathroom. I've talked to Australia on this machine.
Incredible. So. That's fantastic. Now, the other thing that you had mentioned to me, and I asked you to bring along with you because I thought this was so cool, was a portable kit that has, it's sort of kind of a go bag, if you would. I mean, it's got,
we call it a go kit.
call it a go kit, and it's got a completely self-contained scenario. This is, I guess,
this is a radio. It's the same, roughly frequencies of that handheld.
Handheld.
And it contains a battery, a power supply. If I do have a generator, and I could charge the battery, it'll run the radio off the battery.
So if I take a vacation trip up to, Yosemite, and I'm up in the backcountry and stuff like that, and I have something like this with me, as long as I can get to a repeater,
yes,
I'm able to communicate almost anywhere.
Yeah, but again, you don't even need something this big. It could be something as small as the
one of these little guys.
The one that Wolfgang showed you a little while ago.
Wow.
Just to make that point, I had an amateur radio with me in New York State, upstate New York, and I was in a little cabin, hooked up a wire, and with perhaps less than 100 watts of power, I was able to speak to someone in Poland, and they spoke, fortunately, English, so we had a good conversation.
So let's talk about what it means to be a qualified person. What does that mean?
Okay, I'll speak. When I got into this, I had just moved into a high school as a new teacher, and I was approached by a student who said that they needed a trustee for their amateur radio club. And I said, well, don't I need a license to do that? He said, yeah, but first, back in those days, you'll have to learn the Morse code to pass the 5 words a minute test, and then it's a multiple choice test. And he had the hardest time getting me to learn Morse code. But I'm a teacher, I'm a retired teacher, and this was a multiple choice test. 4 choices, 20 questions, and it occurred to me, I've been giving these tests for years. I can do this.
Right.
So I passed one test and another, until I have the license that I have now.
Very cool. So we've got about 5 minutes left in the show, but there are, so you said so Wolfgang, there are different license levels?
At the moment we have 3 different license levels. We have the technician license, a general license, and an extra license.
Okay.
And in the past we had 5 different license levels, but it got simplified.
Do the
now.
levels give you certain authorization to do things at one level that you wouldn't be able to do at an earlier level?
Essentially, the license level tells you what kind of frequencies, which part of these bands you can actually use and operate in.
Got it. Okay. And what is the, and I think we had the, they probably put this up a couple of times, is the website for the ARRL, which stands for the American Radio Relay League. And what is the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League?
This is a bunch of people that got together, I think, 1914 or thereabouts, that were interested in maintaining the art of amateur radio, in spite of being called a ham. And they are people who represent the amateurs' interests when it comes to legislation.
Okay.
And they also provide educational materials. That's why they give you the website, www.arrl.org.
Right.
And on that, you can find the other information that you need.
So how does someone learn to do this? What do you do? What do you have to do in order to, I mean, you mentioned it wasn't all that difficult,
It's a multiple choice test.
It's a multiple choice test.
There's going to be one that's absolutely wrong. There's going to be one that, I don't know, maybe, and then there are going to be 2 that are really close, okay? So it's going to be a choice of A or B, okay?
And
I encourage you.
You don't have to get 100%. So where do you go to take these tests? I mean, is this like you have to go to Washington, D.C. or something like that?
It turns out there is a group of licensed amateur radio operators, and they're called volunteer examiners, and they are authorized by the FCC to perform the exams and essentially issue the license. I mean, FCC will do it, but they will confirm that you passed your test. And there are a number of places around here, many places where you can go and Saturday morning and perform. Do your
And can
test.
someone purchase a radio like this one or the one you showed me? Is this something I can buy on Amazon? Or
Yeah.
You can buy that on
really?
Amazon.
Wow, very cool.
But you need a license to use it.
And you license to use
Other,
it.
other than to receive.
Other than to receive,
Yes.
right. No, that makes sense.
In this
What's
country.
the difference between something like this and the sort of like, citizens band radio, or the kind of family stuff that the kid, you get the little walkie-talkie things in the house with the kids, and is it its ability, is the frequencies it transmits on, is it how far it can go? What's
Okay, can I?
I don't know if that's
let's
a-
see, I have a. Once upon a time, I had a citizens band license. Okay, I had to have a license. You paid for it, but you couldn't fix the radio. You couldn't adjust it. 5 watts of power was the maximum. You couldn't change anything more than your antenna. And although it was on a particular frequency that could give you distance, that too depended on time and sunspot cycle. But really, you weren't allowed to use it for that purpose.
So-
it was citizens.
and it's kind of fixed on the bands that it can transmit on.
Fairly narrow band of.
Whereas with something like this, you have the opportunity to go to multiple things, provided you have the level of licensing that is authorized.
True.
Right.
And we have the infrastructure of repeaters, which
And we have
you don't
infrastructure
have it,
repeaters. Got it. That's very cool. So we are at the point now where we have less than 60 seconds left in our 30-minute conversation here. So this has gone by very quickly. And I want to say, it's actually, I very much enjoyed this. I think we've covered some ground. We understand, the transmission. We understand that something about antennas. We understand something about the capabilities of devices that are, even this small, and you can get them big and, hook them up to antennas. You can do it out in the field and stuff like that. And how to go about and getting a license. They go up to the ARRL.org, and I'm sure they can direct you to local places where you can actually go take the tests.
And if you want to see this in action, Fire Station 2 in Sunnyvale, the intersection of Wolf and Arquez on the last weekend in June, you'll see it in Field Day. 22nd.
22nd, June 22nd. Well, fantastic. Well, on that note, we're going to end off. So, Wolfgang, Jordan, thank you very much. I appreciate your being here. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time on Reference Point.
Thank you.